What's up, guys? It's John with National Sports Entertainment, and I wanted to go into just something I found interesting. While I'm on here, I guess I'm still logged in. I'm going to go into something. I went into this earlier in the season. I'm going to go into the Jets game in a second, obviously. Just ridiculous game. But I do think there's a couple teams we really have our finger over the target, over the pulse, and that's what's important in the end. I did a futures video if you haven't seen it. But what I find interesting here is I look at the Super Bowl futures just because I find them to be helpful in about every regard. You know, I break it down to the divisional and conference. But I've noticed there has been quite a few narratives, and honestly, it was just looking at Vegas and the off-season talking points, the ones they really hammered, and then, of course, just going into the week. And they really have been, I guess, not as subtle. So in the past, they would just kind of hint at something. Now they're just coming out and saying it. It was part of the reason, and I know we're only 1 week in, so again, we're always going to have to reassess. But there's a few things that I found interesting. And so one of them, again, these Super Bowl predictions and just how teams are going to fare. You notice the Vikings are really far down this list, despite having a great year last year and only losing one game. Now, it was a game they shouldn't have lost, but it was still just one game. There's a lot of teams that lost one game they shouldn't have lost. I believe the Vikings are down here with the Rams because of one reason. Before the season, and this is one that I really think we're going to do well with, it's always about, my system is always about picking your spots, and the Lions were listed as favorites to win the division. Barely. They were like minus 125. Vikings were like plus 125. And I just found it very unusual. And then Vikings were slight underdogs, I think, to make the playoffs. Lions were slight favorites. And again, the Lions, no disrespect towards them. It was one of the good plays we had this week, picking them over the Chiefs with the money line. It's just, they really didn't do that much to warrant this kind of talk. You could see a team like the Jets tonight because you added Rodgers, and we'll go into that whole thing, obviously. I'm sure people want to hear about that. But you add weapons, and the team is, when you have a young team that had a lot of rookies, a couple year pros on defense specifically, they're just going to be better, So that's how they're going to be pitched. So that's something I found interesting is the Lions. So I almost, again, it's only a weekend, but just based off of the narratives we're getting, and they're not so subtle this year, if you haven't noticed. Like tonight, for example, the narrative being the Jets defense just completely in our face. But it's looking like a few early season, and they were, they're predictions that I think most people would have thought were nuts, such as the Vikings not making the playoffs. I think they're going to have a horrible year. I've been saying that. I think the Packers might be the team to, because of Love. I don't think they're really sold on Fields, and I think they're going to do all. You're going to probably have the three of them do okay, but I don't think any of them are going to get to 500. Now, another one is again, the Jets kind of remind me of the Lions of the AFC, just based off of the way they play, the way they're portrayed. Their Goff's not as good as Rodgers, but older veteran quarterbacks, young guys surrounding them. They have explosive players and all those types of things. So I think both those teams are going to do good respectively, and obviously the Lions beat the Chiefs, and the Jets looking all right so far. So I do think that the Jets are going to have a good year. One of the biggest reasons I like them, besides the 9/11 thing and a lot of things that I thought were interesting, I don't just use symbolism. It was because there's teams that they'll hype up and then they'll lose, and then there's teams that they'll hype up and then they can really talk about them. And again, DJ Reed just put out a tweet not that long ago. We're the 85 Bears. We're the Legion of Boom. Bart Scott compared. This was brought up by, I think, Snoopy. I hope I'm accrediting the right person. Compared the Jets to Colorado. And you know how I feel about anything Dion right now. He played for the Ravens and the Jets, which is interesting, Bart Scott. And you're getting a lot of these types of comparisons where they're just saying this Jets defense is insane. I had a couple player prop suggestions. I played it myself. I had Sauce getting a pick. I had DJ Reed getting a pick. I had Williams getting a couple sacks. And they didn't happen, but I just picked the wrong players. Good job to Hutch. He was in the Discord, and he's like, Josh Allen to throw over a pick, and it was like slightly plus odds. It happened. And then he's like, I'm betting him to throw over 1.5. It was at like 200. Then it happened. He's like, I'm gonna pick him to get over 2.5 for like 500. Then it happened. So he just kept hitting because I think we all noticed the same thing. First off, Josh Allen sold really bad. I think I went into a video and I went into this. I asked, why did Josh Allen suddenly just completely lose the respect where it was Mahomes and Allen, where they had it like Brady and Manning. And then suddenly it was like, oh no, Burrow's that guy. And then now you got like Tua and Lawrence, and they're really getting the treatment that Josh Allen was. Lawrence has been elevated, I would say, ahead of Josh Allen, and probably Hurts as well. Hurts ahead of Allen, I mean. So it's pretty crazy when he's might not be in a top 5 quarterback conversation. The Bills have kind of ran roughshod over this division. I think we might be starting to see, and it's funny the odds, This you see the Cowboys and Bills with the same odds. I think that's very interesting. But to me, this just shows, again, that I think the Bills, it's a market that isn't as hot as marketing to the Jets. The Jets haven't been hot in a long time. The Bills have won this division several times. And again, Kansas City lost the first game, but Buffalo, I'm not saying that means, the Chiefs are missing the playoffs, like I said, or, yep, the Bills aren't going to win the division, like I said. But I do think we're at the very least going to see drastically regressed teams. So we'll have to see how that goes going forward. Another one that I went with, I didn't do a video on it, but it's one I suggested to anyone that asked, was I did think the Chargers were going to win over the Dolphins, and initially, and normally I'd always go Dolphins. I really believed in Tua and Hill and the way they were pushing them. Then last year they had the injuries, and suddenly, even when he was kind of healthy, they weren't doing too much. Like Hill and Waddle would have some breakout games, but then they wouldn't. I feel like it's different this year, and the reason I believe in Tua, I went into this last year, is he's Samoan. He's playing in Miami, which is the Rock's hometown, essentially, where the Rock played at the U. And the Rock has talked on many occasions, and he kind of passes it off as a joke, but not really. Like, he says it with a pretty serious tone about essentially how all Samoans are related. And if you look in wrestling, anyone that's Samoan, they're like, oh, this is the Rock's third cousin. So I had a feeling that Tua was part of a very maybe rich bloodline that he shares with the Rock, and they're going to really push him. So that's the reason I like Tua, is the Samoan heritage. I do think that's something that's underlooked. So then we go into, like I said, I wanted to just show the Super Bowl odds while they're up here because I thought it would be interesting. So I wanted to go into, of course, tonight's game. It was an interesting one, and it's kind of, so the over-under was already set, kind of. I didn't think this over-under made much sense. 44.5, that's like a Browns-Bengals over-under. To me, 48 to 52 made about more sense on a primetime game. I get the weather wasn't great, but they didn't know Rodgers was going to get hurt. I'm sure they didn't expect the Bills to only get 16. So it was a weird over-under. But I didn't, specifically play that one. It was just, I always look at the over-under and see if I think it looks too high or too low. Now, this game, again, is just a perfect example of how scripted the NFL is. And again, in a lot of cases, I do think that they'll basically, for the most part, let the players play, but they'll make sure they get the outcomes they need. And then other games like the Super Bowl, it's just like you see completely purposely blown assignments, things of that nature. This was one of those games. So you had, where the Bills would get the Bills looked like they were going to win the entire game, and I think that's what Vegas wanted. Where even though the Jets were really playing better all around, they really were. I won't say all around because they were stagnant on offense, but they also didn't have the mistakes the Bills did. But the one thing that they made abundantly clear is 2 points that I was trying to make. One, DJ Reed's tweet about the 85 Bears. I guarantee, watch First Things First tomorrow. I think they're going to have a graphic showing the Jets defense versus these other defenses. How Allen played versus the Jets versus how he's played against all these other teams over the last couple of years. They're really trying to push the narrative. And I'm not saying they're not a good defense, but they love narratives. So I think they're going to push the narrative. Oh, yeah, it's going to be, the Jets defense did it by themselves against the Bills. Imagine when they have Rodgers. And Rodgers, you know how I feel about fake injuries. This one was very suspect because it wasn't one where, like, some people were saying he stretched out his leg, but in my opinion, the key term is he. He's the one who decided to stretch his leg out. He was a perfectly normal sack. It was a very light sack. The individual wasn't even in proximity to his ankles, and then like he kind of stretched it. It was really weird, and I don't think it was real. I really don't. I think it was probably to get people just pounding Buffalo, thinking, okay, Wilson's coming in. So that's just my opinion. But yeah, Allen arguably had the worst game of his career. So the Jets won the game. Really, why? They won the game because on the Bills' final drive, they played really well, held them to a ridiculous field goal. By ridiculous, I mean it hit the front of the upright and managed to bounce in. So for the magnet people, I'm with you. I personally have a theory that I think is a good one. I don't think they had the poles are magnetic. I do think that the net behind the poles are, because that would have a much stronger field, and it could be made out of some nano atomic particles that would be the reason that they need a net. Like, why would you really need a net? Fans getting souvenirs is not a problem. Like, it's not like the NBA where they need the ball back immediately or you get escorted out of the arena. I wonder why. But with football, I feel like there's no need for a net outside of you don't want anyone in the crowd getting one. So I always found that interesting. Now, again, it was all defense. And I think I really am getting early Ravens vibes from the New York Jets, early 2000 Ravens. So you see Allen, even in a bad performance, like, he's able to look decent. His percentage rate wasn't terrible, but it was mostly short passes. And again, that's what reminds me of the Ravens, the flocking to the ball. They're really pushing how they just, swarm to the ball. Or even the 2000 Bears with the Urlacher. I think he's the most overrated player of all time. But that team still had a very ball-hungry defense where they just all got to the ball. So the Bills didn't do terrible. But again, they got 16 points. It was basically, if you look here, all Diggs, right? Really, Gabe Davis had that nice catch, but outside of that, just really bad. And then you can see Allen almost with 5 turnovers because he had the one that he recovered. They recovered, I think. Oh no, he fumbled it twice on the same play. So I wonder if that's why. Yeah, he's got to recover. So I'm guessing the fumble picked it up, and then then it got hit out of his hands again. And people were telling me that was suspect, that, they're like, what are the odds that, it was really weird. He muffs the snap. It looked kind of awkward. Then he picks it up and just fumbles it anyway. And I do think. Now, what tipped it off for me was the very first interception. If you can get highlights of that one, I'm sure you can, because if they show hopefully they show the right camera angle. This guy had just ran like once or twice and got first downs, did what he needed to do. It's 3rd and 7. He rolls out to the left. There's not a soul in front of him. Like, he could have ran. I'm like, oh, there, he's going for 15, 20. That's a shame. And then he just heaves it down the field into double coverage. So there's no way people can tell me that, and most people aren't. Most people are telling me this is the most scripted crap ever. But for the people that think it's real, there's no way they can say a guy that supposedly has this kind of IQ is making those kind of plays. So, of course, they had it set up where it was basically the entire game, the Jets couldn't do anything, but they were, like, staying in it by trading field goals, or they got that one touchdown. And then, of course, it goes to overtime. And what happens in overtime? We get a punt return for a touchdown. The people on my Discord can attest to this. I said, like, as the guy was punting the ball, I'm like, I feel like they're going to return this for a touchdown, because the Jets defense had done everything, and then they just stopped the Bills on their opening drive, and I'm thinking they're not going to let Wilson be the guy that led this team to victory. It's going to be the defense. So my first thought was that the Bills were going to immediately turn it over in overtime. I thought they were going to throw an interception, maybe a pick six, but I really thought the Jets were going to get a defensive touchdown, and it wound up being a special teams one. But yeah, when he went to punt that ball, I was like, I'm feeling a touchdown on this play, because again, it just made sense. So they're going to go to, of course, they're going to, go to the numbers on this. And the Jets defense is going to be treated, again, the way they played, like, rightfully so. But it's going to be the narrative that this defense is the best defense that teams have ever seen. Now the Cowboys, I think their defensive effort was way more impressive. The Jets looks more impressive because you see the guy getting 3 picks and you see, how bad. I mean, it was against the Bills, so maybe it was more impressive. The Cowboys, I don't think they're doing that against the Bills, but just how quickly the Cowboys were getting to the ball. Obviously you get the blocked field goal; those could be flukes, but I mean the Giants couldn't move the ball at all. It was pretty bad. The Bills were moving the ball. So anyway, that's a different discussion. I just thought the whole thing was interesting with the Jets here. So, it could be symbolism. They did go to Lady Liberty right before the Jets scored. I think it was the tying. I don't know if they tied the game with a touchdown. I think it was on that drive they tied the game with a touchdown. They went out, they showed Lady Liberty, and then they came back. So the Rodgers thing, again, very interesting. I'm curious what people think about that. I personally think, because if you noticed for like the next 20 or 30 minutes, they were like, yeah, he's questionable, or he's just getting checked out. And then afterwards, they're like, oh no, he was in a walking boot immediately. So I'm wondering if they let it linger there for that little bit of time, because then people are going to pound the Bills. They get as much money, probably more in live action than they do pregame these days. So I really think that something like that happened. But yeah, this one reminded me of the one that the Dolphins did it last year, or was it the Jets against the Dolphins? It was one of the. I think it might have been the Jets against the Dolphins. I can't quite remember, but the Jets are this type of team. Like that, each team seems to have like a gimmick, and the Jets for a while, and in the early 2000s when I was a Jets fan back when I thought it was real, and then again, I reached reasoning and I'm like, okay, it's not. But the Jets with Santana Moss, they were always that kind of team. They played feisty defense. Then even after that era, they had Vilma and they had, obviously, Revis Island. Not as much flashy plays, but the Jets, you can always kind of what you see is what you get. And they're trash talking, and they got these young guys. It just made more sense for me for the Jets to win. And like I said, I know they're hot takes, but for future bets, I think getting in on the Chiefs to miss the playoffs and the Bills to not win the division are good ones. The Bills not to win the division is all those teams outside of the Patriots are all getting decent, like plus 200, high plus 100s. So it's not a crazy payout for a future. But Chiefs missing the playoffs is like 7-1 or 8-1, or picking another team to win the division. As you know, and here's another one I think we were right about. Again, it's early in the season; it's tough to tell. But Jimmy G, I like the Raiders. I've gone over that a couple times this season, and I think it's just something. They show his win percentage. You see how he coexists with teams. He just always does his job. So it might be like a Jimmy Butler thing. They call him Jimmy G too. So I think everybody has their doppelganger. Not that they look, not ones that look alike, but doppelganger in the essence of their being and how they're treated. The superstar, the celebrities, all that different stuff. I think Jimmy G's paid his dues. He's with a guy that he's been successful with. I really think there's a good chance the Raiders win that division, and they're a good dark horse. I mean, with the Super Bowl being in Vegas, I think they're at least going to keep them a competitive team, and that's just my opinion. I think the Broncos might slightly improve. The Chargers, I've been saying this for a while, and people keep telling me, no, they got this guy and that guy and the other guy, and they're fun and they're the most popular team in Los Angeles. I mean, maybe. I think it could be the Rams won a Super Bowl, then the next year their team sucked, so they could just be like, okay, that Super Bowl was a one-off. It's easy to see why Rams fans might not be that reinvigorated. They were definitely the number one draw the year they went to the Super Bowl, and won it. So to me, that's nothing crazy. Like, even if the Chargers are more popular than the Rams, I still don't think they're a top 7 draw in the AFC, and that's really what it comes down to. I do think that there's a good chance 3 teams from the AFC East get in, and I'm still sticking to my beast narrative. And my beast narrative is an entire division's going to get in, and that would be the first time ever. And I predicted it for the NFC East last year. The Redskins came within a tie, so a half game of being the 7th team. So it was close, and I think they're going to stick with it, especially with how 3 of the 4 teams in the NFC East did. Obviously, the Giants did terrible. So it could happen in the AFC East with the Patriots. You never know. But yeah, early on, Jets defense is a big takeaway. I'm going to focus less on traps, things of that nature. And obviously there are traps. But for example, with the Jets, I'm expecting a lot of unders going forward because they're going to want to slam that narrative home that it's all defense. It reminds me again of the Bears with Grossman. Unless, Rodgers comes back quicker than expected. And even if he does, I think, again, a real or fake, there's no reason he's going to come back and suddenly look amazing. The Jets offense did not look that good, and with or without Rodgers, the offensive line was shaky. The running game was pretty good. No receivers really draw. I think Rodgers, the big thing is going to be Cobb and Lazard. They're going to push that as, these are his guys, and you'll get a bunch of those possession receptions. Not a lot of explosive, exciting plays. And speaking of that, like I said, Tua and Tyreek Hill, I do think that they're the real deal this year. I think they wanted to push that narrative last year, and I went into why. I actually did a video. The people that have been following for a while will remember this. I put out a video saying why Tua is going to get hurt in tonight's game, because they were planting tiny seeds. Yeah, he hasn't seen that much contact. They're a feisty team. All these things. And then he got the, quote, concussion. And I say quote because he was on the ground and, he sold it like he got German suplexed. But the guy that sacked him was already on the ground. There was, no momentum. And then you'll see him just slam his helmet into the turf. So, in my opinion, he that was completely a fake injury. And speaking of fake injuries, we have Rodgers. Looked completely fine. We've seen way worse hits. And again, yeah, you could fall wrong. Anything can happen. But I think that was a fake injury. I think that was planned. And, yeah, the Tua one, I think they're going to roll with Tua. So it's going to come down to a lot of stacked quarterbacks in the AFC East. If you notice, there seems to be a trend. In the NFC, you have the defenses. Even most of the teams are better on defense. The Rams, the Seahawks, obviously the Niners and Cowboys. And then probably the Eagles, too. And maybe not the Eagles. Their offense is explosive. They're probably about 50-50. And then in the AFC, it's the quarterbacks. You got Trevor Lawrence. You got Lamar. Most of your top quarterbacks are coming out. I don't think that's a coincidence. They do it in basketball where your teams on the West Coast seem to have higher scoring, three-point shooting matchups, a la Blazers, Warriors. And then your teams on the East Coast are more physical and well-rounded, a la Knicks. Miami Heat, things of that nature. So I have noticed that. I think it's just like marketing to certain areas. Pac-12, high scoring games, all flashy. SEC, gritty, again, sound football, hard-hitting games. So yeah, I know a lot of people liked the Bills in this game. Again, this is one where you can see symbolism on both sides, right? You got red, white, and blue. One thing I didn't like was Deion is playing Colorado State next week, and their colors are green and white, and Deion plays for the Buffaloes. So I didn't like that because I'm like, oh no. But again, I think I've been just going so far down the Deion rabbit hole when every single one of his teams won the other day. Baseball, football, college, I thought that was ridiculous. So, I could see a couple teams, but all 11, from the Reds to the freaking Braves, Yankees, Giants, Cowboys, it was pretty insane. That parlay would have paid out $167,000 to one, but if you put $100 on that, you won $167,000. Obviously, no, I don't think anyone would have saw that coming, but just a crazy commonality. So yeah, I think again we have some good narratives going forward. We didn't get them all, of course. Some of these, they're not really narratives. Like I had the Bengals win in this game because I thought that just because of the way they were treating Joe Burrow versus other players. Obviously, Watson wasn't in great graces. I thought it made sense the Bengals were going to win this game. But again, Bengals-Browns, always tough ones. Division rivals are always tough one. And it was really the traps that what I thought were traps. Having this, I thought the Steelers would win this game because to me the line made no sense. And of course, the same thing with the there was one other game like that where the line made, I thought, no sense. Oh, Eagles-Patriots, 4-point line. Of course, it's a 5-point win. Would have been 3 points if it was the was the if the 2-point conversion wasn't called back. But yeah, so like a couple of them I just thought were traps. But as far as players, as far as futures, who's looking good for the playoffs, and narratives of the team, especially because it's week 1, I think I'm pretty happy. I think we're pretty over the target. Now it's just going to be a matter of who beats who and when, right? So we have like Kansas City playing Jacksonville, that can go a couple ways, and a lot of other games. But I think this season, unlike maybe any other, I thought it's something very interesting Joe Buck said. In my last video, I said I wonder if because they made the commercial mocking us for thinking, having the gall to think it might be scripted or rigged. And between that and the fact that they're actually talking about it, like I said, on shows, they're saying, oh yeah, the Vegas spread on this line looks weird, so I think this team's going to cover because I think Vegas knows something. Like, that's logic that they're using. So I think when we're seeing that, there's a very good chance they're going to come out and maybe have a more realistic week. Now, I don't think it's going to happen all year. But what was interesting is Joe Buck, I think it was Buck, said, yeah, this is something to the effect of, it was late in the game, and he said, like, this is a new NFL, and things have changed. Something to that effect. And there was no reason to say that. Like, things have been changing. Nothing has changed drastically from last season to this season. And he said it specifically about this season. So he said it's a new league. I think that's what he said. It's a new league, and things have changed. And I just thought that was a really weird statement. So anyway, anyone that hadn't seen, again, my rig system, doing very well. We had the 1 3-legged loss yesterday. And like I said, we just closed that out. It's a 7-unit loss. But we came through. We got our leg 3 on the... Oh, this is my separate one, sorry. This is just additional ones. We got our leg 3 here on the Jets with the Bills. Slightly plus odds. I just said a unit. Technically, it was like 1.4 units because it's a leg 3, so we wagered 4 units on it. And it was like plus 110, 115. Now, another good thing is I know a lot of people got in on the Jets game when it was live. So they were like down, and it was like a 10-1. They were like a 10-1 dog, and a lot of people got in on them. So that's good. And I know a lot of people got in on parlays that had Jets and other teams. So that's good as well. So yeah, again, this was a rough week, but we were still able to mitigate a lot of rough losses. A leg 3 loss. We lost all the 1 o'clock games. We got 2 of the 3 night games, so that's nice. Last year, it's funny because you'd think primetime would be harder. We picked much better with primetime last year than the 1 and 4s. Like, I don't know if it's because it's like one game and there's more time to think about it. I'm not sure, but we'll see how it goes this season. But yeah, last year we had some nice upsets, just some good picks. A lot of times we went 2 for 2 because we got the over under 2. So yeah, I don't know what it is. Primetime seems to be pretty interesting. And yeah, this is a primetime game, and they were talking about Dion. They were showing him again and how he's playing Colorado State. And I'll be going into that. If I don't get that pick right, and there's some backstory behind it, so I'll go into Colorado State. But yeah, if I don't get that pick right, it's going to be laughable because there's no reason that shouldn't be a complete lock. I watched a lot of, I know it's going to be the first time you've ever heard this in your life. I watched a lot of Colorado State football last year, and it was one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen. It's just, you could feel free to watch some highlights of them from last year, and you'll see why I can't imagine. The spread makes no sense to me. But yeah, so like I said, certainly not a good week, but we were still able to mitigate most of our losses. And the important thing is, like I said, with leg 3s, we're not going to see a ton of them, of course, but we're going to see them. And it's just important that we close, even if we split the leg 3s we get, because again, it's not like every third or fourth play is a leg 3. We're 14 picks in, so with only 1 leg 3 loss. And the way it works is, like I said, 7 units is what is a leg 3 loss, 1, 2, and 4. So if we lose 7 units off a leg 3 loss, but we win 8 sequences, then that nullifies it plus 1. So we're actually up plus 1 if that happens. And we're, I think, 14 sequences in with only the one leg 3 loss. And we only have one on a leg 2. The rest were all leg 1s. So really good in my opinion. And this is basically what we did last year. We didn't pick 80% every week, but we hit the right games and we did the best job extracting value. So yeah, what I think it means going forward is, again, I think the Jets are going to have a historic defensive year. I don't think that was much of a surprise. Maybe how good they played for some people. But, again, I grew up a Jets fan. So what happens is it's like every 10, 20 years, they give these teams the same gimmick. And it's like it's like, oh, man, this is reminding me of how they played 10, 15 years ago. And this Jets team, they're reminding me of the early 2000s, just the way they're being pitched. Just almost like them on steroids. Because in the early 2000s, they had a bunch of average players. Even though they were doing a great job, they had a bunch of average players doing these things. Now you have bona fide stars that are in these roles. And again, that's not even including Rodgers. We'll see what happens with that. Now, next week, Buffalo. Another thing is Buffalo, I'm pretty sure Hamlin's going to win in his home debut. So I thought it made much more sense for them not to win here. That way their first win would be with Hamlin. The announcer said something else that was interesting. They thought the Bills have been deflated ever since he was hurt. So I guess we could see something like he comes back and suddenly they start playing amazing. I'm not quite sure. They're going to find a way to get him comeback player of the year, though. I'll guarantee that. No matter how good Tua plays, no matter how good some guys that you'd think should be shoo-ins play, in my opinion, he's going to be the one that wins it. So, yeah, I haven't looked really too much into week 2, to be honest. Not sure how many lines are out. Yeah, okay, we got the Thursday game here, 7-point game. Again, I think the people are remembering the Vikings as, there's this great team. And this is reminding me of the Rams. Because the Vikings, yeah, they lost Cook. I get he's an important piece of that team. But they're not really known for just a fierce rushing attack. They're known for their defense. They're known for they have a great offensive line. I don't think they lost too many pieces of that. Still have Cousins. Obviously, they have the greatest receiver in the league. And then they got another receiver to complement him. So I just think people aren't expecting the Vikings to have a bad year. I think even I don't take the experts seriously. But usually when they say a team's going to be just god-awful, they are. Because it's bad for them to be that wrong. So like when they're like talking about the Panthers, nobody's saying like, yeah, they have a shot at the Super Bowl. Because it makes them look ridiculous. So, but the Vikings are getting that kind of talk from some of these experts. And I just think it's completely to lead people astray. I don't think the Vikings have a good year at all. I told somebody, they said I was crazy, but I told somebody I thought they were going to get 6 wins or less because I genuinely think they're getting the Rams treatment. That's all I can say. They had an amazing year, a little bit changed, and yes, it was one game. And to me, it's not even the fact that they played the Bucs. I just think they're going to be terrible because of that Vegas line. And it's basically got them even with the Packers now for second place in the division. So I just don't think there's much more marketability in the Vikings. I don't think Kirk Cousins was ever the answer. They were probably just in there to be red herrings for a couple years like most teams are. So yeah, there's not a ton to go into. Like I said, there's only been 1 week of football. They're using the rust excuse for like a lot of these quarterbacks playing bad. I don't think you can use the rust excuse for Josh Allen. He was intentionally throwing the ball. He was playing 500. He was just heaving up stupid passes, and there's this one. To be fair to the, I do believe there's magnets. Even if you look at this still shot, look at how his hands are positioned. Now I understand he was in a very awkward spot, but like once he suctioned his hands that way, the ball just kind of pulled into his hands. There was like no movement. There was 2 bobbles. He bobbled it with his left hand, but once he was on the ground and then he got his hand set, it just kind of sunk into his hand, almost like a pool ball sinking into a pocket. It was really interesting. So, yeah, I do believe that they have magnetic gloves and things like that. Actually, I'm almost positive they do because they have a specific rule in college where you can't have because there are gloves that have magnetic beads in them, and they have a rule that you can't wear those gloves. But in the NFL, there's no such rule. So I found that very interesting too. Somebody told me that a jet went down at 9/11, and I guess he got injured. I find that interesting. The one thing I find really interesting is Rogers. He's the captain of the Jets, right? And a pilot is a captain. And then obviously the pilot went down on 9/11. So I found that interesting that, the Jets captain went down. So I do think that things are symptomatic. Again, my take was Jets are what collapsed, the building, the World Trade Center. So I'm like, well, technically the Jets got the better of that deal. So, I mean, neither did, I guess, but they were the ones who obliterated the building, supposedly, right? So, yeah, it was like goofy symbolism, but that's why I don't use symbolism too much. To me, it was more about the talking heads and the narratives, Again, the Jets defense being amazing. Usually when they harp on a defense, the only more a blatant one is the offensive line. When they talk about how good an offensive line is, you can guarantee that game there's going to be like no sacks, maybe like one tackle in the backfield, no false starts, and they'll do it so haphazardly. 1 week they'll say, "Oh, this offensive line's great." 3 weeks later, they won't talk about that same offensive line. They give up 3-4 sacks. So it's really interesting, but again, I think they just purposely do all of this stuff, from the Rodgers going down immediately, the defense carrying the team against a top 5 offense in the league, Allen significantly dropping off early in the season, of course, but still significantly dropping off, in my opinion. If Diggs wasn't open, basically, there was nothing he could do. That wasn't the case with Mahomes, where we saw he was still doing a pretty good job, and he did a much better job running, even though Allen does like to run more. So, again, I think this is just another way of showing us that Allen, they're done with Josh Allen. And Bills fans are telling me he's the worst actor, how he'll just fake cry. And I saw him twice on 2 occasions. He threw an interception, walked over to the sidelines, took his helmet off right when the camera panned to him, and love tapped them against the bleacher, or not the bench. He just did this little love tap, and his face was just completely expressionless. So he's definitely, when they do that stuff, it's like the manager's kicking dirt at the umpire. It's just completely for dramatic effect. So I think the Bills fans are onto something. He's such a bad actor. You can't have bad actors. You can't. I was gonna say I don't mean bad actors by like people that are spies, that are there to screw up everything. But they can't have that either. But I literally mean they can't have actors that can't act. And that's what Josh Allen is. He's a terrible actor. He just no-sells things. And I genuinely think that's why they're going to have Lawrence. That's why they're going to have Tua. They're going to be probably undeniably on his level. And they're probably going to be undeniably above him at the end of this season. So I could be wrong. I could be dead wrong. But I do think that they're pulling the plug on Josh Allen, where maybe they had Super Bowl aspirations. I think he's just going to be another quarterback that, man, he can make some great plays, but he just doesn't have the football IQ. So, yeah, you guys let me know what you think of any particular game this week. I'm curious of anyone's opinion. And, of course, this was the game that just happened, so I'm sure people have a lot of opinions on this. Maybe the most ridiculous play. For me, I'm a pretty simple guy. The field goal was laughable, obviously, off the post. The punt return just to immediately, in overtime where nobody took a good angle. That one was obviously ridiculous. But to me, it's just the obvious ones where if I'm rooting for this team and they do this and I think it's real, well, I don't know how I would think it's real if that happened, but hypothetically. But either way, if I'm rooting for a team and I see the guy do this, I'm just like, what the hell? Why are you doing that? Of course, I'll take it if it's not. But for me, it was Josh Allen, who loves to run. If he sees any pressure, he'll run straight through the middle of a pocket, and put his shoulders down, rolls out to the left to break everybody to the point where there's nobody even near him because they were playing some kind of cover 2. So everybody was in a man, and you had the 2 guys deep down the field, one of them being Whitehead, and he could have ran for days, and he just heaved it up there. And that was such an obvious one, in my opinion, that, I think anybody could have just seen, like, okay, he sold that there. And then he did it like 3 more times, the fumble, just playing terrible. So I'm curious to see what we see out of Josh Allen going forward. I don't know. We might see an injury, but I think he's going to have a pretty rough season. Jets, again, there's teams that get hyped and then nothing happens. To me, that makes no sense with the Jets, with the money they've invested into the Jets. You have a crowd that actually is thinking that their team can win the Super Bowl. That's never been the case with the Jets. So Jets, you got the Cowboys too. They've been getting a lot of love in the offseason, and a lot of times it's to lead people astray. Like I said earlier, if all the analysts are saying, "Oh yeah, these guys are looking unstoppable," people, if it gets real, are going to say, "Yeah, that makes sense." But I think this time it was brought up for a different reason. And the last thing is, yeah, he got hurt right away, but his replacement did terrible. So it's not like his replacement came in and outshined him, like when Dak was outshined by Rush, who was, I think, undefeated in all the games he played, except when he came back for that one game. I don't think they won it. But it's not a case of that. It was like they were really missing Aaron Rodgers, but their defense is so damn good, they barely got the job done anyway. So I don't think it's a punishment for Rodgers. I think he is going to be rewarded. I've been saying that. So probably when he returns, it's going to be like, oh man, we're cooking. And I think that's basically the case. The reason I think he's going to get rewarded is Djokovic won the U.S. Open in New York. John McEnroe had just said, I want to get Djokovic and Rodgers on a show together. I'd love to talk to the two of them. And then people were outraged because they didn't take the vaccine. Oh, no, they're terrorists. You can't talk to them. But he talked about them together. And I found that interesting because, again, the U.S. Open just happened. Djokovic just won. Rodgers was calling him, a hero, calling him Novak's Djokovic, and just saying how much he respected him. So I really think that since he won, there's a good chance some of these players might have leverage. Your Kyrie Irvings, your Rodgers. So I think they're going to have good records, make the playoffs, and I think eventually Rodgers will get it going and have a good year. So again, just early season predictions I wanted to go over. Basically, again, these are what I went over in my, if you haven't seen them, my futures videos. I did like 2 or 3 of them before the season. And, the biggest things that I thought would happen are the Chiefs-Bills, notably Allen for the Bills, maybe not the Bills, but more notably Allen. And then for the Chiefs, just the team in general. I think they might shock people, and one of the two miss the playoffs. I'm leaning Chiefs miss the playoffs. Bills maybe get in as a wild card. And yeah, we're seeing, again, we saw a lot of games that Niners, Steelers, 9 times out of 10, that's a trap. They pummeled them. So I'm curious if they keep that up going into week 2, week 3. Usually there's only like one team running roughshod. So when you got 3 of them, I include the Eagles because, again, it was just like a late game flurry. They had that game dominated from beginning to end. So Cowboys, Eagles, Niners, I'm curious if they keep that up or if we start seeing some uncharacteristic mistakes and things of that nature. So again, I think it's always good just to reassess everything we possibly can. So if anything like earth-breaking comes up, I'd gladly reassess, but nothing's really changing my mind on most of these divisional winners. We got the Browns, Bengals, Ravens, Steelers. Again, the Ravens, I think it's going to take a few weeks to see what's really going on. I do think it would be a mistake for them to miss the playoffs, just because they are a draw. Then again, the Browns are a team that hasn't been there in a bit. So, again, they're another division where it's going to be close, but I think by week 3, week 4, we're going to have a much better pulse finger over the pulse as far as, yeah, this team's trash. They're doing something with this team. So, yeah, let me know what you think. You can let me know what you think the most ridiculous game of all these were. I think, fittingly, it was the Bills-Jets game. I think there were so many sold plays, and by both teams. There were so many missed tackles by the Jets, and then they'd clamp down out of nowhere, or Allen would make a boneheaded throw. They'd have to settle for 3. And it just seemed to be the case all game where it was like, again, the Bills looked like they were going to be in firm control. And, again, this is one that, watching live, I think a lot of people saw coming from a mile away. But They set it up for Allen to do his infamous 2-minute down the offense, and it was so obvious. And I understand they only had one timeout, or they might not have had any, but they had like I think it was a good minute and a half, and this guy marched down the field on the Chiefs in like 12 seconds, and they were obviously playing for the field goal, almost like they knew it was going to go to overtime. They weren't even trying for the touchdown. Like, they'd complete a 12-yard pass and take 10, 15 seconds to get the snap off, and then they're around midfield with like 30 seconds, and they're just doing the same thing. They're taking their sweet time. So I thought it was interesting. If you look at pacing, that can also give stuff away. To me, they were definitely pacing for a field goal. And not being cautious, I mean just really burning the clock for no reason. So, of course, it set up the Jets' punt return, which I thought was scripted, as I think all of this stuff is. And, yeah, it was a good win. Good job. There's a lot of them that, it's a leg 3. It's nice to win. But this one, there were just so many people in Discord that liked the Jets and piled on live. I don't know how much they piled on, but just really, as the game went on, it's like, they're keeping the Jets in this. It's weird. The defense is looking unstoppable and getting a bunch of good live numbers from 500 to plus 1,000, depending on when they got in. Because when the Jets were down 10, I do believe it was around plus 1,000. Because Rodgers had been rolled out and all that stuff. So yeah, if there's any symbolism that you noticed, let me know. I didn't notice much, again, outside of them going to Lady Liberty before, the Jets scored a touchdown. And the rest of it to me was narratives. This was definitely a narrative game, just showing that this Jets defense, now they can say, yeah, see, look, early on, it's only been a week, but they do kind of resemble the 85. They do resemble the early Ravens, 2000 Ravens, the Legion of Boom, all these different squads. I think their secondary, even though they got the interceptions, they gave up a lot of wide open passes. So they might not get the Legion of Boom comparisons, but they're going to get good comparisons for forcing 4 turnovers and then getting a punt return for a touchdown. They had a few sacks. So I think they had 5. So, I mean, it was a, I don't know if I want to say all-time defensive game, but if you're looking at the numbers and you're including special teams, there's a pretty crazy game where obviously the defense did it all themselves. So, yeah, I just like to always do a recap, and tonight's game was extra entertaining, so I wanted to go into just my opinion on why this game ended the way it did. And I think this is going to be the theme with the Jets for several weeks. It's going to be, they brought in Rodgers, they brought in all these receivers, and it's the defense that's winning them games. Now, again, a lot of that's going to come down to how long it takes for Rodgers to return and that, but I do think it's going to be, the Jets defense is going to be one of the talking points of the year. Again, despite other teams like the Cowboys, they pitched a shutout, and they went nuts on defense. It just, they're talking about the Jets defense more, and I find that interesting. So, yeah, good. Again, congratulations to everybody. I'm glad we were able to get this one. Had a rough week, so won the first one, won the last one, so that's nice. The middle wasn't great, but they were both leg 3s, so that's always nice. And, again, as the season goes on, college as well, I think we'll really start to get a good gauge on these teams. So take care and happy earnings.